Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Hiller. I'm the Senior Museum Educator here at the museum. My specialties tend to focus on science, especially astronomy and physics. And so I'm going to be presenting our Fantastic Fossils program for you today, just a short snippet of it to give you an idea of some of the things that we do in this program as well. And many of the things that Fran mentioned at the beginning of her presentation with the rules in the classroom and how we are supported and how we have someone behind the scenes, that goes for all of our programs throughout everything that we do. So allow me to share my screen and let's learn a little bit more about fantastic fossils. All right, so in this program, basically we are going to be focusing sort of New Jersey centric, but we can talk about different types of prehistoric life that have existed across the world because New Jersey has not always been in the same location that it is now. So the planet has changed greatly along with all the life on the planet. And so we can really discuss about what we find here as results of fossilization of prehistoric life when New Jersey was in other locations around the world. So New Jersey has been home to many varied and legendary forms of life. Much of ancient life can be explored by looking at fossils. So we can learn more about worldwide life by exploring what we find here in New Jersey. So in this program, students become young paleontologists by exploring images of fossils that represent life in New Jersey's prehistoric time. And using pre-made activity dough, which the recipe will be sent to the teachers well ahead of time. And we ask the teachers to pass that recipe on to the students so that they can make the dough with their families ahead of time. We will then use that dough and materials found around the house to make fossil imprints or models of fossil imprints similar to what you're going to be seeing in the presentation today. So, as with all of our programs, we do have curriculum standards that we do find, not only New Jersey, but also national as well. And for some of the interactives that we have in this program specifically, and in some of our other programs as well, we use poll questions, and we use the annotation function in Zoom to allow the students to have a creative thinking opportunities to add a sense of fun so that they can be more participatory in the conversation rather than just sitting there listening to someone talk. Guided by the instructors, students will be making models of fossil imprints, and I did make one, so I will have that at the end of the program to show you what it's going to actually look like. But we also use argumentation, and that encourages students to discuss ideas and claims together in a respectful manner. So even though we might not initially agree on a topic or on a claim, we have a way of discussing it respectfully where we can each voice our opinions about what we think and then come to a conclusion using the data that we are given to figure out what the answer is. So what I'd like to do with you now is take a portion of the program and have you type into the chat your answers. And in this program, we talk about what fossils are, how they form, but we also focus on how old fossils are and how we know this. So what I want you to do is take a minute to look at the left-hand side of this picture where you see 5 different colored layers. I want you to imagine this to represent the ground. And imagine the ground like a stack of pancakes. So each pancake or each layer that you see represented by a color is going to represent a period in Earth's history. And what you find in that pancake can give you clues as to what lived at that time. So in this picture, if we think about how the Earth is formed and where we find the oldest layers, which color layer do you think is going to be the oldest in this picture? Go ahead and type that into the chat. Which colored layer is going to be the oldest? And if Sarah, Kirsten, or Fran can read for me from the chat, I would appreciate that too.
Purple.
Purple. Pink. Now, why do we say purple or pink? Is there a reason why we think that's the oldest layer?
I think because it's at the bottom.
Because it's at the bottom. And you are correct. Even though the Earth is very active and we have a lot of tectonic activity and some lower layers can be pushed upwards to be higher up, mostly the lower layers are going to be the oldest ones. Now, knowing that, I want you to look at the different symbols. What could those symbols possibly represent that would be found in those layers? What might we find in some of these different layers? What are we looking for? What's the topic that we're talking about today?
Shells, some people are saying, fossils, rocks,
Good.
minerals,
Minerals, excellent.
bones.
The bones, absolutely. Yep. And depending upon where we find them in the layers, knowing if what, say the purple layer is the eldest, what we find in that layer is going to be the eldest fossil or bone or rock that we are looking at. So one way we can date the fossils that we find are to date the rock that surrounds them. So even if the earth has shifted and we have a lower layer that's been brought up higher, we can actually figure out how old that layer is by the kind of rock that's in it, but also by the kinds of fossils that we find in it too. And that helps us to determine how old a fossil is. In this picture though, do you see any layers that might have fossils that represent different types of life that may have lived at the same time? So what symbols do you think, or what layer do you think might have fossils that represent different forms of life that lived at the same time?
Someone's saying the red layer and maybe green.
Okay, red and maybe green, because you see some of the symbols are found in the same layers. So in this way, we can make an assumption that perhaps these different types of animals that left behind these fossils lived not necessarily cohabitated, but lived at the same time. And so does that mean that all fossils are the same age, that all fossils are found in every single layer? This gives us more of an idea of the history of the earth and how life has changed, because maybe we don't find the same kind of life in every single layer, because as we know from fossil records and from our Earth's records, there have been a lot of extinction events, there have been a lot of things happening to where we can only find certain species at certain levels. We're not going to find, say, a Tyrannosaurus rex in the same kind of rock that we're going to find a Mastodon, because they didn't live at the same time. So this is one aspect of how we would interact with your students. And of course, instead of having them type in the chat, we would have more of a conversation about what they think. But we do want to open up the opportunity, if some students are not comfortable speaking, to allow them to answer in the chat as well, so that everybody feels comfortable in sharing, even if they're not comfortable in speaking one-on-one as well. So along with how old a fossil is, we also talk about the entire history of the Earth and where we would find all of these fossils time-wise, not just layer-wise in the planet, but also time-wise. So if you think about the entire history of the Earth from 4.6 million years ago all the way to today, think of it like a football field. And you start at one end, at one goal line. That's where the Earth was formed. You have to go all the way down to the 12-yard line, and that huge amount of space encompasses the Precambrian period, or the Precambrian era of our planet. And this is the largest brunt of time that our planet has been around. And as you can see, the symbols we have on here over at the 15-yard line, let me move the faces here. Over at the 15-yard line, we have the Earth has become solid enough to where you can have rocks forming and find them on the surface. Around the 25-yard line, we have the first microbes and bacteria forming. But then we have to go all the way down to the 12-yard line to find our first bivalve. So the precursors to today's clams and mollusks and oysters and mussels. So their ancestors, you have to go all the way down to the 12-yard line on the opposite end of the football field just to get to that point. In this picture here, do you see any signs of Tyrannosaurus rex or other dinosaurs? Do you see any signs of woolly mammoths? Do I have any symbols to represent those animals there? No, I don't, because they haven't come around yet. So all the fossils that we tend to think about when we think about fish, when we think about dinosaurs, when we think about fossilized eggs, when we think about mastodons and mammoths, that's all in that little section, that little 12-yard section from the 12-yard line to the goal line. All of that life happened in that small of an area of that football field. So it's amazing to think about how much of our planet, how much of the time of our planet has been around where a lot of things were not happening. So only in this last section did things really start taking off. So let's take a look at that. In the Paleozoic era, going from the 11-yard line, we have the first fish fossils we can date back to that time, about 540 million years ago. At the 9-yard line, we have the first plants. At the 8-yard line, we have the first amphibians. The 7-yard line, we have the first reptiles. Down at the 5-yard line is finally when we start seeing our dinosaurs. And it's amazing. This is only 5 yards from that ending goal line. We started out at this goal line over here. We have to go all the way down the entire football field to the 5-yard line to get to where the dinosaurs begin to appear. Now, if we continue on, the Mesozoic era, that is the age of the dinosaurs. So our dinosaurs start roaming around. They start getting bigger. They start getting stronger. We get our Tyrannosaurus rexes, our Brachiosauruses, our Ankylosauruses, all the really cool ones that the kids just absolutely love. But then we start seeing, at the 4-yard line, we start seeing the beginnings of mammals. Very, very small, like about mouse-sized mammals, roaming around, because mammals didn't start out very big. They started out very small, as most life does. Around the 3rd-yard line, we get to the indication of feathers becoming prevalent on some of our dinosaurs. And then we have to go all the way down to the 1-yard line, again, the exact opposite end of that football field, to have the extinction event that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. At this point, we're still not talking about mammoths and mastodons and saber-toothed tigers and even humans. So we got to go one step further to the Cenozoic era. This is the period that we are in today. So from the point that the dinosaurs go extinct, we have to go from that 1-yard line all the way down to about 1.5 inches away from the goal line. And that 1.5 inch mark is where we see the indication of the first humans. So compared to the Earth and compared to how long the dinosaurs were here, we have not been here for that long. And so I really like using this analogy with the students to give them an idea of the scope of the time frame and when things began to occur and how long things were around for, and the fact that we have not been around for that long. And we can find and learn more about the Earth's history by examining fossils from these different periods. So to show you one example of what the students will be seeing, this is a picture of a Columbian Mammoth dig at the Ziegler Reservoir site in Colorado. This is an example of some of the fossils you would find from the Cenozoic era. So not dinosaur fossils, but still prehistoric life, because this program is not just about dinosaurs. It is about prehistoric life in general. And you can see in the inset up in the upper left, that is a picture or an artistic interpretation of a Columbian mammoth. What animal today does this remind you of? Go ahead and put that into the chat.
Elephant.
Elephant, very good. And that is true. The mammoth is a direct ancestor to the elephant. Our nowadays elephants, they connect to this ancestor. Now, how many of you have heard of a mastodon before? Okay, yeah, a lot of people have heard of mastodon. Mastodons and mammoths sometimes get a little confused when we talk about them because both were very large, had really long tusks, but the head shape was a little bit different, the sizes were a little bit different, and also the teeth were different too. So if we find what looks like a fossil of an elephant ancestor, one way we can identify whether it is a mammoth or a mastodon is by looking at the teeth. So on the left-hand side, you see a mastodon tooth. On the right-hand side, you see a mammoth tooth. What sort of similarities or differences do you notice? Put that into the chat.
There's a lot of black.
A lot of black on both of them. Yes, absolutely. And that is typical for a fossil to have something like that coloring on it.
One looks like ridges.
Oh, one looks like ridges.
Another entry is the mastodon has ridges that are vertical and the other one has horizontal ridges.
Very good observation. So for the mastodon, we have very sort of pointed molar teeth. But for the mammoth, we have something that looks more like, oh, and I forgot to pick it up. I don't have a shoe on right now, but look at the bottom of a tennis shoe, the grid lines on there. You can associate that with kind of the way the mammoth tooth looks. And that's one way to remember, is it a mammoth, is it a mastodon? Does it look like the bottom of my tennis shoe? If it is, then it's a mammoth. If it's not, then it's a mastodon. That's another way to associate something that the kids have on them or with them or have seen before, to associate sort of what does it look like to you as well. So this is one way we can actually determine whether the fossil that we found is either a mastodon or a mammoth. So to wrap up the lesson, what we do with the students is we go ahead and we make a model of a fossil imprint with them. And so that's why that recipe for the dough will be sent to the teachers ahead of time so they can share that with the students, so they have the dough all ready to go before we start meeting for the lesson. Now, one type of imprint that we can make, and we are going to be making in this class, is called a growlator. This is a dinosaur footprint. So growlator by itself is not a dinosaur. It is a type of fossil that's left behind, and it is an imprint fossil of a three-toed dinosaur that was left behind millions of years ago and has been fossilized. So the students will have the material list ahead of time. They'll be able to make the dough ahead of time. What we will need though for the lesson is they'll need something like maybe a butter knife or a spoon or some sort of utensil to where they can push into the dough to make their imprint. So to show you an example of what this would look like, I made this one this morning. I had some leftover dough from the last time I did this. So you can see the larger, let me get my annotation one on here. Let's go ahead and do my drawing here. You can see the larger footprint over on this side. And you can see the smaller feet over on this side. And the size of the footprint that we see can tell us a little bit about how big the dinosaur is as well, and also the number of toes that we see too. So this is another way of getting them involved in more of a physical creating something that they normally wouldn't get a chance to hold, and especially won't get a chance to hold now since we are going to be doing this virtually. And they can leave this out to dry so that they can have this as sort of a souvenir of the lesson plan itself. All right. And one thing that I absolutely love doing and seeing, I'm going to clear away my drawing here. There we go. Is I absolutely love seeing the results of what the students have done. So even after we are done with the lesson, if you have them do something with our post-visit worksheets, or you have them create something as well, we would absolutely love to see how you're using what we offer you in our class, or in your classrooms, but also sort of what you do along with the students beyond that too. We would absolutely love you to share your experiences with us, but then also spread the word out as what we are offering here too, to all of your teacher friends and friends that might be homeschooling now too, because we want to reach as many people as possible, especially in these times as well. But that is going to end my presentation here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and turn it back to Sarah. So thank you everybody for your time.